Hey everybody, this is Party Elite, bringing you some early access content for Total War Warhammer 2. This video highlights what I think are some of the most interesting abilities and traits that are coming with Game 2. There's plenty of new stuff to look at, of course, but these are some of my favorites in terms of how they look, what they do, or how clever they are. First up, breath attacks. We're pretty familiar with this by now, but dragons, hydras, and similar beasts now have access to an ability that allows them to shoot some form of magic missile or another at an enemy unit. They have a somewhat short range and can't be used when engaged in melee, but when they hit a dense formation of units, they will do a lot of work. While the spread of damage can be used to weaken a flank or the center early on, the amount of damage can help quickly drop morale if you need to send an enemy unit over the edge into a rout. When Teclis obtains his quest item, the Ring of Fury, he unlocks access to one of the prettiest new spells in the game. From the lore of high magic, Fiery Convocation is a wind spell that does, well, this. Obviously available for multiplayer battles as well, this is an example of how magic has been made more prominent in the second game. By having Fiery Convocation as a bound spell, it doesn't take any winds of magic to cast, though currently Teclis is limited to 2 uses of this bound spell, so make sure to use it like a Wind of Death to get maximum value out of both. Again, as I explained in my video about changes to magic, Fiery Convocation can be directed by clicking and holding the left mouse button down and shifting the mouse around, giving it much more potential. Next up, we have the Armour of Stars and a Skaven equivalent of sorts, the Concealment Bomb of the Assassins and Death Runners. When activated, these abilities give your unit the ability to stalk, and they can only be seen when the enemy is extremely close. This allows Death Runners to take an advantageous position without being shot down by artillery or range support, and without being chased by cavalry until they're spotted. It can also help an assassin circumvent the enemy to strike at an enemy lord or caster without being intercepted beforehand, and on the noble, there's an extra touch of interest if you've got him on a chariot. Now you've got a relatively fast unit that can be absolutely devastating to a line of ranged units or unprepared, unbraced melee infantry units and remain unseen during the approach. Alternatively, these abilities can be used defensively, on the escape, or when you see the enemy sending a unit to intercept, you can hide your units to get away to safety. Witch Brew is a great ability with an interesting drawback. Available to the Death Hag, it gives a fantastic plus 26 melee attack and a plus 50% weapon damage, but it causes the Death Hag to rampage. This basically means that the Death Hag is going to go on a bit of a killing spree, but you have no control over where she might go and which way she might attack. This lasts for a whopping 42 seconds as well, and while some of these numbers are subject to change after release and over the courses of patches, it's pretty clear that the intent here is to bring uncontrolled devastation to the field. You'll want to get near a targeted enemy unit so your Death Hag doesn't run around killing fodder troops with great finesse, of course. Madness of Kain is an effect that the Witch Elves can apply to an enemy unit when engaged in melee. Much like Poison, the effect has a chance of taking hold on any unit successfully struck in melee. These effects include a negative 10% melee defense, negative 24% speed, and being put in a state of rampage for 16 seconds. While the first 2 pieces are relatively standard affair, I find the imbuing of rampage status to be pretty interesting from a tactical perspective. It can be used to literally tear an enemy formation apart if you send Witch Elves in to strike your enemy's lines with the Madness of Kain, and then have them chase after the Witch Elves right into a trap. Alternatively, by peeling the enemy front lines apart, you can create gaps for other troops to push through. Might be micro-intensive, but certainly sounds interesting. Another new effect can be found under the Skaven banner in the form of Contamination. As one might expect from Plague and Plague-related things, there are some units, such as Skrulk himself, Plague Claw Catapults, and Plague Monk Sensor Bearers, that can inflict the enemy with Contaminated. This is similar to Burnt in that it does leadership damage, though it does an extra couple of points for a total of negative 10. I've said it many times, morale is the real health bar on the battlefield, and this definitely helps reduce an enemy's will to fight. It's nice to see more of these status effects get added to the game, and that's primarily the reason that this is on the list. These little extras can make units very unique, not only in what type of damage they put out, but also in their ideal tactical uses on the field. In a similar vein, the Death Runners have an interesting effect with their melee attacks as well. The Weeping Blade means that any enemy struck by a Death Runner suffers a negative 50% armor penalty for 35 seconds. It's very important to note that this is a percentage debuff rather than a flat number. It halves enemy armor, allowing otherwise non-armor piercing units to get some damage into armored enemy units as well. Again, it's nice to see a variety of such additions to the game. Then there are the abilities that can more or less give some of your deadliest units a second wind. The War Hydra, Flamespire Phoenix, and Hell Pit Abomination all have equivalents. Let's start with the War Hydra that fittingly has an ability called Another Takes Its Place, obviously referring to its heads. When the Hydra has health drop below 50%, it can fully regenerate that health to its cap immediately up to 3 times. The Flamespire Phoenix comes in with what might be considered a weaker variant. When health is below 10%, the Fiery Bird might either regenerate hit points for a couple seconds or instantly die. This really has a risk-reward feel to it, but as a unit ability, you don't have a choice about taking it to the field. Then, with what I think is an amazing combination of abilities, we have the Hell Pit Abomination. Too Horrible to Die gives the Hell Pit Abomination a chance of replenishing hit points when health is below 10%. Alternatively, it might drop dead, but even if it does, the Rats Emerge might kick in. This spawns a unit of Skaven Slave Spears when the Hell Pit Abomination dies, and while they aren't a powerful unit by any means, they are an additional unit where you might otherwise have a gap. Next up, we have an ability shared between the Skaven Warlord and Queek Headtaker, similar to one that Crocbar brings for the Lizardmen, though it's slightly different. The Skaven name for this ability is Verminous Valor, an absolutely hilarious name for what it does. Using this ability triggers an explosion with the Warlord or Queek as a center point. This explosion throws units back pretty hard, but explicitly does not affect friendlies. It also gives a significant plus 24% boost to speed and a plus 8 to leadership for 14 seconds. As for what I find hilarious, there's nothing valorous about this ability. It's literally an escape mechanism, and I'm very curious to see how similar abilities get implemented across the factions to imply the ability of an individual to always come out unscathed. Crocbar's equivalent is Swiftness of Itzel. This has a similar explosion affecting only enemy units, allowing Crocbar to get out of a tight spot with a plus 36% speed boost for 35 seconds. And yes, you can also equip it when on Grimlock. Neither of these abilities are good against large units, but if your commanders are getting swarmed, this is an effective way to get them free while causing damage. In a similar flavor of escape tactics, the Gutter Runner unit variants all have a Snare Net ability that triggers when an enemy unit enters a 45-meter area around the unit. Slowing the enemy down with a negative 24% to charge speed and speed for 19 seconds, the relatively fast Gutter Runners can make a quick exit. Important to note, however, is that any enemy hit by the Snare Net is safe from its effects for 90 seconds after it first wears out. And as a direct opposite to escape, there's the shiny new and improved Expendable trait. Any expendable unit has its leadership affected by other expendable units and regular units, while regular units ignore friendly expendable units. By this I mean that any leadership penalties from seeing friends rout or mass routes stay contained within expendable units if they start to rout. So no, Queek will not feel the need to leave the battlefield with his Storm Vermin just because some Skaven slaves decided to up and leave. Glad to see the expendable trait brought to life so that our units may die knowing they did their part. And to cap things off, Attuned to Magic is an interesting trait that both Flamespire and Frostheart Phoenixes have. As magical beings, Phoenixes are able to use the Winds of Magic themselves, evidently, to stay safe from harm. When your Winds of Magic are above 50%, all your Phoenixes have a 12% damage resistance to help keep them alive and fighting. This is almost incentive not to use magic and adds another layer of thought when using it, especially with the Flamespire Phoenix around with its relatively low armor and middling melee defense. I'm extremely excited to see so much variety in the abilities and traits given to units in the game and how they all play out. There are some serious tactical implications to things like Witch Brew and Madness of Kain, and effects like Contaminated and Weeping Blade add a layer of interest to the battlefield, going beyond armor, rock, paper, scissors, and damage types. This also bodes well for the future factions, showing that there's still plenty of room to make minor differences between units. Just the change of -2 leadership between Burnt and Contaminated is a good example of something that could have been skipped on to keep it simple. I'm happy that that wasn't the case. As always, make sure you subscribe to this channel for more Total War Early Access content, battles, Let's Plays, and more. Thank you very much for watching, and until next time, cheers.